I'm Steve, and this is going to be a long video. We're going to be talking about a hole in the heart. Not the song. The anatomical problem that's called a PFO, patent foramen ovale, and that can cause stroke in young people. Bear with me, we'll split it all up into nice chapters so you can navigate as you wish. But this is my story. So everything began back in August 2020. We were living close to Geneva at the time, and quite simply I woke up one morning. When I was lying there in bed, I noticed something strange with my vision in one eye. I noticed a kind of a blurry dot, and it wouldn't go away no matter how much I rubbed my eye. So I decided to try and get up, and then I realized that things were a little bit off. My balance wasn't quite right. I was maybe starting to feel the first signs of a headache, a bit of throbbing at the back of my head. I thought, and when I stood up, I realized my balance was really off. I was having great difficulty walking without the wall. Then I started to notice some pins and needles. I called out to Justynia, my wife, and I remember she suggested, oh, maybe it's an allergic reaction or something, and that's what I thought was the most likely at that point. It's only when I walked over to the mirror and had a look at myself that I got scared, because I saw one side of my face was drooping. And this I remembered from the various publicity campaigns about stroke, and I got very scared, and for the first time in my life I said to Justynia, let's go to the hospital right now. We got in the car and we went. We lived quite close to the hospital, so it didn't take long. In retrospect, and my advice to anybody who might experience this is call the emergency services. But in our case it worked out fine. On the way to the hospital I was dizzy, I knew something was wrong, but I was coherent, I felt fine, I could walk. We arrived at the hospital and straight into the emergency room. Obviously, priority immediately. They treat you straight away when you say that you're suspecting. Actually, when we arrived, Justynia told them in French that I was having a heart attack. And neither of us knew the word for stroke. So I was like, no, it's not a heart attack. I'm not having a heart attack. I don't think so. In any case, they realised that there was something potentially serious, hooked me up to all of the machines, blood tests, blah, blah, blah. My vitals were a little bit all over the place, I think, but there was nothing obviously wrong, I don't think, from that point. I had elevated heart rate, tachycardia, these kind of things. Some of my blood numbers were a bit off. What they did at the hospital essentially then was to do a CT scan very quickly with angiography, so where they map the blood vessels in the brain to look for a stroke. Imagine my relief when they found nothing. Nothing whatsoever. So by this point, all the symptoms had passed. In fact, from the start to the finish, it was probably no more than about 40 to 50 minutes, including the trip to the hospital. Actually, once I got to the hospital, I started to feel more or less well, which I suppose is good, but also annoying when you need to show people what's happening. So after a few hours, 3-4 hours in the hospital, they discharged me. And I was incredibly relieved, also a bit worried, not knowing where this came from, and understanding that these were strange symptoms. I'd never had anything like this before. So they released me with some instructions to do some more tests outside of the hospital. They sent me for ophthalmology, for an MRI. I hadn't done an MRI up to this point. I'd done a CT scan of the head and neck, and for various blood tests. I went, I did all of those things. Ophthalmology was fine, blood tests more or less fine, and the MRI wasn't fine though. On the MRI they found what they told me was called a lesion. Sounds very scary. I was sufficiently worried when I heard that. But the doctor, the imaging doctor who was interpreting it, was really very blasé about it. He's like, oh, well, it's very small and not really much to worry about. So once again, my mind was a little bit put to rest, but put at rest, but there was still this niggling doubt. So they had found something on the MRI. What this means is, what they'd found essentially, they explained to me, was a blood clot, which in other words is a stroke. When a blood clot passes up to the brain or forms there, this is a stroke because you're restricting the blood flow to the brain. That's the definition of it. However, when I went to see my GP to discuss these results, stroke was the very last word on his mind, clearly. I mentioned it a few times and he gave me this strange reaction which was like, well, you know, maybe it isn't, which confused me greatly and which led really for the first 6-9 months, if not more, I didn't know what to call this. I didn't think I'd had a stroke. I thought perhaps it could have been what they call a TIA. And here you get into technicalities. What's the difference between a stroke and a TIA? It's the same thing essentially, just the duration and the effects are much shorter of a TIA. So probably in terms of time I had a TIA, but I don't know, the distinction seems to be somewhat academic and not entirely agreed upon. But I had something. There was something. We'd found something wrong, and the question was then what caused it. Now, the bizarre thing is that the hospital released me with the recommendation to do, after a CT scan, with the recommendation to do blood tests, MRI, ophthalmology. They did not recommend any cardiological follow-up, which in retrospect is really strange. My GP also didn't. It was only when I started pushing for that after I did the second MRI. So I did the first MRI a couple of days after landing in the hospital. It showed the lesion, and then I was asked to do another one about 8 or 9 months later to check, because apparently the lesion should continue reducing gradually over time, and to check that no new ones are forming. So I did that, and it's only after the second MRI that a different technician then told me to make sure to keep on pushing to try and find an explanation. I explained to him that up to this point, aside from the evidence of a blood clot that we'd found on the MRI, we hadn't found anything else wrong. Oh, here's Pippa. We hadn't found anything else wrong at all. So this doctor who was interpreting the results said, make sure to keep on pushing, because at your age, and I was 35 when this happened, this shouldn't happen. Perhaps what I should have said at the beginning. Back in August 2020 when I landed in the hospital, I was only 35 and I didn't belong to any risk groups. I didn't have any other problems, medical. I was a vegetarian and had been for years. I knew how to eat and how to eat healthily and to give my body what it needed. I didn't really drink very much. Never smoked in my life. And since I was about 10 or 11 years old, I'd always been doing a lot of sport. I'd done a lot of competitions, and I was in good shape, moving all the time, despite the fact that I had a desk job. So it was unexpected, to say the least. After this second MRI, I finally got sent to a cardiologist. I went to the cardiologist, and the cardiologist was horrified, let's say, to say the least, that I was only seeing him 9 months after this had happened to me. He could not understand why neither my doctor nor the hospital had sent me to a cardiologist. So one of the many lessons I'll share is, if you haven't been referred to a cardiologist after something like this has happened, you need to go to one. Cardiologist and neurologist. I didn't get to see either until 9 months after. This cardiologist was great, Dr. Stefan Voll in Geneva, and he started doing cardiological tests. Again, found no issue with the heart, but he wished to do a deeper, more invasive test that had to be done at the hospital. I didn't realize it at the time, but this test, I think, was a transesophageal echocardiogram. So it's a probe that they put down your throat, and it rests around here, and they get a very close view of the heart that way, much better than with a transthoracic echocardiogram. So he wanted to do that, but he needed to get the permission for that. In the meantime, we were moving countries. We did that a couple of times, and I kept on pursuing these investigations. I ended up doing the same tests more than once in more than one country, which was kind of good in a way because it showed that there was definitely nothing missed, that there was nothing wrong. It all came to a head really when we moved back to France in 2022. I was almost ready to give up, having found no real cause for this stroke, this TIA that happened, and knowing that when you don't find a cause, it's called a cryptogenic stroke. And even though it's relatively rare, they do take place in young people, and perhaps more than you would think. So I could have written it off to that, but I didn't. And I kept on researching, and we were in Perpignan in France, and the hospital centre there took on my case after a referral from a cardiologist in the city. And they basically redid all of the many tests that I'd done in the different places I'd lived. They found nothing, once again, until they did this transesophageal echocardiogram. TOE, or TEE, depending on how you spell esophageal. It's all very confusing. They did this. Now, a word of caution. When you go onto the patient groups and you research this exam, as you probably will and you should before you do it, you'll see a wave of largely Americans saying how easy it is. It isn't. Or it depends. The thing that they don't often mention is that generally Americans are put under, they're put out, they're unconscious or in a twilight state when this exam is being done. For me, here in France, in Perpignan, I wasn't. So this is a probe that they insert down your throat, through your esophagus, and that rests around about the level of the heart, and essentially it's an internal echocardiogram. Gives some great imaging of the heart, allows them to confirm or rule out a PFO, so a hole in the heart, which is what they were looking for. All that I got, obviously I got an IV in my arm because they inject saline bubbles in order to see where the bubbles can pass from the right side of the heart to the left side of the heart. All that they gave me was a gel, a numbing gel that they sprayed the back of the throat. That was it. And then they tried to put the probe in place, and it was horrific for me. It was really difficult. The gag reflex was still very, very strong, and it was very unpleasant even when it was in place. If you're going to do this exam, and you should do it, you shouldn't be afraid of it. You will need to do it if you suspect that you have a PFO. Make sure that you find out under what conditions they're going to do it, and insist on some form of sedation, because this is one exam that I'm not exaggerating, you do not wish to do without some sedation. It's not pleasant in the slightest. All you need is, I'm told, I've done it twice, and I was told how to do it after the second time by a physician in a different country who said, we generally give our patients 5 minutes or so of propofol, mild sedation, whilst we put the probe in place. And they find that the patients tolerate it quite well once it's in place. It's getting it in place, getting it down the esophagus, which is the terrible part, if you're awake. I'll go back 2 steps. This exam was basically at the end, more or less, of the many exams that I did. And at this point, they were looking for a PFO, which is a patent foramen ovale, which is otherwise known as a hole in the heart. Actually, it's not a hole, and it's not a heart defect. Everybody has it as a baby, and after birth, usually in about 75% of people, maybe 70, it closes up on its own. Natural, something to do with the pressure, change from the womb to the real world. In about 25 to 30% of people, it doesn't close. And it's not a hole per se, it's more like a hole with a flap. This can connect the right and the left chambers of the heart, which after birth should not be connected. So this is the venous system and the arterial system. And if a clot appears in your body, which can happen, something I realized after this whole experience, clots do happen, and usually they're sent down to the lungs where they're broken apart safely enough. But if one happens and you have this PFO, this hole in your heart, it can theoretically pass through that passage. It can go from the right to the left and then head up to the brain, causing a stroke or a TIA. So they don't proactively close these things, which is important to note. They tend to only close them if you've had an event, like a stroke. So they did this exam. The first time didn't work very well. There was a lot of saliva. They didn't see very much, but they still confirmed the presence of a small PFO. The second time, a more senior doctor did it. Still saliva again, probably because it was such a horror to put in place, the actual probe. But she confirmed it, and a larger PFO. I think it was a passage of more than 20 bubbles. As I said, they inject saline bubbles. They look for them to pass from the right to the left. And they ask you to lay there at rest, but they'll also ask you to strain as if you're on the toilet, called the Valsalva maneuver, to see if under stress the hole opens up. They found this. And then the question was, do I wish to close it or not? Given that every other test that I'd concluded over a period of about 2 years from August 2020, and this is a long time, usually they find some sort of a cause to attribute it to relatively quickly. So this is a long time. I had done and repeated many tests in 3 different countries and find nothing. So this was the only test that found something. So I was under the care of the neurology and the cardiology departments at Perpignan Hospital, and together in what they call a consortium of doctors, I think, they took the decision that this was the most likely cause of the stroke and proposed me a closure. Now we get on to the real interesting stuff. How do you close a hole in the heart? At the hospital in Perpignan, they proposed me a closure with an umbrella device. This is the most common. It was made by a company I think called Abbott Medical, and it's known as the Anplatzer PFO occluder. It's basically a small umbrella that they, if you imagine the hole, they put this umbrella through the hole and then they deploy it. And on both sides of the hole, a little screen opens up once it's in there. They pull it out and that screen, that 2-sided umbrella, remains in place, effectively plugging the hole. I thought, great. Now the thing is, this is a minimally invasive procedure. They do it via a catheter tube that they insert through the vein. So they make a small incision around the groin where the veins are very close to the surface, and they gradually insert these things up the veins towards the heart. They cross the PFO and then they close. I agreed to do this in Perpignan. I was a little bit nervous, but I knew that this being overwhelmingly the most likely cause, I needed to do it. But I then went home and started to research it in more detail. And I was a bit concerned. Because I joined some patient groups as well on Facebook. These are excellent patient groups. I'll put the links in the description. You can have a look. They're excellent. But you have to take them with a pinch of salt because, of course, most people who come to these groups are people for whom the procedure did not go as well as perhaps they expected, and they've got some sort of after effects, side effects of whatever they had done. The people who are the overwhelming majority who had this umbrella placed or the hole closed by alternative means and it was a success, generally don't come back to report on that success. I'm doing it now, and there are some who do, but it's a bias you have to be aware of when you're in those groups, because it will seem, even though they're all super nice, it can be very worrying. In any case, I realized that with a metal device in the heart, and these umbrellas, they're made of something called nitinol, which is an alloy, titanium and nickel. At least the Amplatzer one is, which is the one that was offered to me. Something in my own head didn't sit right with the idea of leaving a device in my heart for the next, let's be optimistic, 50, 60 years. It just seemed wrong. I don't want to push too hard on that because it's a personal decision, but what everybody in the groups were saying was the umbrellas work very, very well for most people. In fact, for almost all. But those people who have it implanted and then have a problem, for the most part, it tends to be a reaction to the metal, even though not all doctors believe in this. For those people, it's very difficult because the only way then to get rid of that problem, that chronic reaction, allergy, let's say, is to have open heart surgery to remove it, which is obviously a big thing. That got me worried. I remembered that when I first started wearing this wedding ring, I had a really persistent allergy to it. The skin was inflamed and I ended up stopping wearing it. So, and this is my advice to you, the umbrellas are good. They've got a great track record, they work well. But in a hospital, unless you're very, very lucky, nobody is going to test you for an allergy to nickel. And it's nickel that is the most important potential allergen here. Titanium, okay, but nickel is usually the problem. Nobody is probably going to test you for that. But there are ways to get tested. And if they do test you, all that they'll do is they'll probably put it on the skin, tape it on the skin for a few hours and look for a dermatological reaction. It's not the best, it's not the most reliable. Tests exist. In Europe, it's called the Melissa laboratory. Again, links in the description. They will do a blood test where they expose the blood to various metals and they look for white cell antibody reactions, and then they give you an answer on a scale as to how allergic you are to the metal X, Y, or Z. It was very hard for me to get that test. The lab in Germany, I tried to send it to them. The lab was great, but the couriers, DHL, UPS, were useless, and they couldn't get the blood there. In the end, I ended up just flying to Geneva because they had another lab in Geneva in Switzerland, and I did it in person in Geneva. And I got a weak positive for an allergy to nickel, which was probably the worst result I could have expected, because it would have been easier to have a strong positive, and then there would have been a very clear decision, no metal umbrella in the heart if there is any other choice, reasonable choice. But I got a weak positive. In the end, I decided, okay, there exists another method to close these holes. In fact, two more methods exist. One of them is unreasonable in my eyes, for me. That would be open heart surgery. I definitely didn't want to do that. Most people will not even consider that when there are alternatives. The other alternative is something called Noblestitch. It works the same, more or less, as the umbrella. They go in via catheter, probably through the groin. They cross the PFO. But they close it with a stitch. It's hard to imagine. We'll put up a YouTube video, a little clip, so you can have a look. It's a device, a very ingenious device. They cross the PFO with a little needle, I suppose. They grab the tissue and they pull it together and they stitch it closed. And all that's left behind is the suture, so the stitch, with a little, well, polypropylene, I guess, suture, with a little thing that ties the knot off, a little tiny plastic thing that ties the knot off. This sounded great because you leave very little behind in the heart, the least you possibly could. And they're closing in the same way that they would if they were doing open heart surgery. Then, you know, they might patch it, they would stitch it. It's a similar minimalist thing in open heart, but it's obviously much more of a shock to the body. So this sounded like the absolute best option for me. And the best thing about it was it's associated with far fewer, if any, side effects. The main side effect of the umbrella that worried me, aside from the potential allergic reaction, was the risk of developing atrial fibrillation afterwards. So that's an irregular heartbeat, essentially. Lots of people have this. It can be different severities. It can be something relatively easy to live with, or it can be something quite serious. It really depends. But there is a risk of developing this. You'll see the numbers vary. I'll put up a little table here that shows the numbers according to the various studies. The impression that you get is that the doctors tell you that the incidence of this is very, very low, maybe 1 or 2%, if I remember right. But I think that the actual incidence is far higher, maybe around 7% or 8%, if I remember correctly. I have to check the numbers. But in any case, this is a risk, and you can be left with this. And logically, it makes sense, because you're putting a foreign body in the heart, and even though the tissue grows over it, your own tissue will grow over it. And the idea is that even if you do have palpitations which develop into atrial fibrillation after the procedure, that as the tissue grows over it, it settles down. And that in this period, they can manage these sort of palpitations with medication. But some people are left with AFib. So I decided I didn't want to risk that either. I wanted to try and do it with the stitch. So I politely declined the closure in Perpignan. I asked, can I do it with the stitch here? And I couldn't. I then researched myself, because they didn't know of anybody else in France who did it this way. There's no practitioner in France currently in 2024 that I know of. So this is when I decided to do it somewhere else. I looked into the UK and into Germany and into Italy as well. These are the 3 major centres in Europe. Though I think there may also be somebody doing it in Sweden, I'm not sure. Once again, you can find the providers in the Noblestitch Facebook group in the description below, or you can ask me. I went to Germany, to CVC Frankfurt, that's Cardiovascular Center Frankfurt, and I had this PFO closed by stitch method, by Noblestitch, minimally invasive, by Professor Horst Sievert, who is one of the probably leading interventional cardiologists in Europe. One thing that's important, I realized when I first went and talked to the interventional cardiologist in Perpignan, who was proposing me closure with the umbrella. He was very nice, and I'm very happy with the care I received at Perpignan. It's them who really discovered this PFO, who took the case over the line. But when I was discussing this umbrella with him, I realized I wasn't properly prepared. My knowledge level is never going to be the same as his. I'm not a doctor, but it wasn't enough to really have a substantial discussion. I hadn't had the time to prepare. Basically, a slot opened up in his calendar. He called me, asked me to come in for discussion, and then to program a closure pretty quickly after that. My message for you is prepare yourself. There's lots of materials out there, including this video, but there's loads more. You're not going to become a doctor, but you can achieve a decent enough understanding to be able to hold a proper informed conversation with them about the options. Doctors don't always know everything either. It's very possible that your cardiologist will not know about Noblestitch. It's quite possible that they will not believe that there is any chance of an allergic reaction to a device implanted within the body. They may tell you that a dermatological surface reaction is very different to the tissues inside of your body, that the tissues inside of your body can't react like that. Yet, there are cases in the scientific literature of devices having to be removed via open heart surgery after the patients experience what can only really be described as a prolonged chronic allergic reaction to the thing. So, try to get on at least a level where you can have a reasonable conversation with the doctor. That's it for the history. My entire medical history in, I don't know, 30 minutes. Now we get to the second part, which is about the closure itself. I headed to Frankfurt in Germany to do this, to CVC Frankfurt, and I'm going to show you what it was like. I couldn't film the operation, but pretty much everything that I could film, I filmed. So let's go. So you definitely need to research the different closure methods that are available. It's very likely the umbrella. There are various manufacturers. It could be the Amplatzer one, it could be the Gore one, it could be Occlutech, I think it's called. There are a few different ones which you might encounter. They're very good. And to be honest, if the stitch had not worked for me, I would have gone for an umbrella. And if it turns out that it doesn't work for me, I will go for an umbrella. The safety profile is excellent. Please don't take away the message from this video that they're unsafe. It's not that. You should get tested for the allergies. Beyond that, research them and take a choice. Now the stitch, Noblestitch, the provider will probably want to see a video or to do the exam themselves of a transesophageal echocardiogram to see the bubble tests that you do with that in detail, to try and get an idea for whether your anatomy is a good fit for the stitch. It doesn't work for all anatomies. It's a bit too technical for me to understand completely. I can't describe to you exactly what kind of PFO you should have, and you probably don't know exactly what kind of PFO you have. But for example, I think it doesn't work quite so well if you have a PFO that is like a bit like Swiss cheese, that is fenestrated, multiple small holes with some gaps of wall between them. I think it works less well in general for this, but yeah, bear it in mind. Come armed with your scans, keep as many documents, videos, whatever as you can. Pass them on to the provider and they'll be able to take a look. Or just go to see them. You know, if they're in your country, you're very lucky. Go to see them and do the exam with them and they'll tell you whether or not they think you're a good fit. Where are we at today? I'm recording this video in February 2024 and I had my closure done in Frankfurt in November 2023, November 21st. So we're coming up on 3 months. Next week will be 3 months since I had it done. And I did here, back in France, the first follow-up check at the very beginning of January, which was a transthoracic echocardiogram. So where they put the echo probe directly on the chest. The doctor in Germany recommended I do the transesophageal echocardiogram, which I wasn't thrilled about, but I was willing to do. But the doctors here said that their standard practice is to do the transthoracic and to only do the transesophageal in the case that they need extra confirmation, in the case that they don't see properly or something like that. I realise in a lot of countries it's like that. The transthoracic is usually what they do afterwards. People call this a bubble test, right? Because at the same time as they do the probe on the chest, looking at the heart, they hook you up to an IV, they inject the saline solution with the bubbles, and they look for the bubbles to pass. So the good news is that the one I did in January, we did this. I did a very good Valsalva. I followed the advice that was in the Noblestitch Facebook group to insist or ask, take a party balloon with you. And when they ask you to do the Valsalva maneuver, to blow up the party balloon, and that act of stressing like this is the Valsalva maneuver. It's the best way to get a reliable Valsalva. I did it, so I did it really well. I know I strained and I stressed, and I had a clear result in this first exam. The technician didn't see any bubbles passing, which was very good. I'm aware that this was quite early. It was only 6 weeks or so after I had the procedure, and it's certain that my tissue certainly hadn't finished growing over the PFO by that point. So we'll do another follow-up in 9 months, and we'll see again, hopefully get a more definitive answer, but my fingers and everything else are crossed that it's closed up well. After that, and in my particular case, where the evidence overwhelmingly showed that the PFO was the cause, my stroke risk relevant to the general population is now the same, apparently. I asked doctors to confirm this. This was a mechanical pathway that was open, and I guess I got unlucky that a small clot went through it. I prefer to think of it that I got lucky, in actual fact, that I discovered it relatively early and in a relatively painless way. It didn't leave me with any deficits like many people are left with problems, movement problems, speech problems, all sorts of things after a blood clot like this. This, I guess, was a stroke of luck for me. I'll never know where the clot itself actually came from, and most of you probably won't. I have my suspicions. August 2020, COVID was raging. Vaccines were not yet available. And I recall that a week or so before it happened, we went out for the first time into a big gathering of people. We went to Bern in Switzerland and did a river descent in a canoe. And there were thousands of people in the park. And this was after the first lockdown, if I remember right. So we'd been at home for some months, isolated. So I do wonder whether maybe I had asymptomatic COVID, which caused a hypercoagulable state, so a lot of clots. This is possible. There is scientific literature being written, coming out on this, drawing a link, even in asymptomatic people, because the link is more obvious in people who have severe COVID. But even in asymptomatic people, that it can drive the body into that sort of hypercoagulable state. But there's little point dwelling on it. They didn't do a COVID test in the hospital. Don't know why. So I will never know. But hopefully the channel, the PFO, is closed. And it was a great experience. As far as, you know, having to have a medical procedure done can be a great experience. But the team at CVC Frankfurt were amazing. I can only say that the best pairs of hands, not just Professor Sievert, who's obviously an absolute expert, but the rest of the team as well. They were just great. I was really well taken care of. The food is hospital food. Make sure you go with somebody who can bring you something nice in. The price, everybody wants to know this. It's no secret. The price in Germany is 9,500 euros for the procedure. In the UK, it's a bit more expensive, I think. It's around 14,000 pounds. In Italy, I'm not sure, but it's worth looking at. I would guess probably 10 to 15,000 euros. In the States, obviously it's crazy cost, but it's a completely different system. It's not cheap, but it is accessible, let's say. The other interesting thing I wanted to say about was, so you'll remember I talked about this transesophageal echocardiogram, the probe that goes down the throat, that for me was terrible because it was done without sedation, twice. I was nervous about having it during the surgery because I realized after watching videos of the surgery that most of the time the patient, at some point during the surgery, this exam is carried out. The probe is placed down the throat, obviously because the doctor wishes to get a great view of the heart that they're working on. I mentioned this to Professor Sievert. He said it's not always necessary, and in actual fact I got very, very lucky, and he did the procedure just with fluoroscopy, so with the X-ray device. This isn't possible in all cases. Well, Professor Sievert is one of the most experienced practitioners in Europe, and doing this procedure with only fluoroscopy is usually something that, as far as I've understood, is reserved for very experienced practitioners. But it is a possibility. If you're going to do it with the transesophageal echocardiogram, I would make sure that you get twilight sedation or general anesthetic, whatever is available to you. That's it. I hope this story helped. I felt after all of this that I'm not a super public person, but I felt like it was my duty to share and hopefully help other people who find themselves in this situation. It can happen to anyone. PFO can affect people at all stages of life, from young kids, teenagers, all the way through to old people. There's nothing you've done wrong. It's fixable, and the operation itself was easy, a breeze.
What's happening?
So it's, time is it? It's just before 7, at 6:45, and we've arrived at the CVC Frankfurt, the Cardiovascular Center in Frankfurt. And we can't get in. And now I'm checking to make sure he did actually tell me 7 o'clock. It would be annoying if he told me 8 or 9 o'clock. We've arrived at 6 a.m.
We got up at 5:30.
Got up at 5:30. There's no buzzer, we can't ring. Trying to catch the eye of somebody, but it's not really working.
What are your thoughts?
Let me check my emails. My thoughts are, let's get this done. And nervous, a bit scared. Never had an operation before, so. But I know I'm in good hands here. And I've got the support of the camera person and lots of other people as well. It'll be good.
Okay, we're thinking that maybe if you said go to the hospital, he meant go to the hospital. It's not the heart center. We'll see.
It seems it's all correct. We're in the actual hospital, the main hospital, not the cardiovascular center. And this is the patient reception. So I think they're going to
Receive you.
receive me, register me, all of that.
Very good. What time is it?
It is 7:11. I think we were received more or less exactly at 7. Very good German timekeeping, and now we're now going here on the 3rd floor after to register with them. We registered with the hospital, now we're registering with the center. This place. Maybe they have a sky bridge that connects.
I haven't seen any sky bridge.
It is 8 o'clock,
Yeah.
and I signed in, filled in a bunch of forms about my health, and then I had an EKG and blood pressure. I also gave the latest blood tests that I had, which I had to take this month, so they're from like 5-6 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Now we're waiting, I think, to discuss with the doctor, and then they'll take me into surgery if I understood correctly. And they said it should be about 30 to 45 minutes, the procedure. Which is good, because I don't like the probe thing in the throat. I'm going to tell him. We'll see. I'm sure nobody likes it, you know, but we'll see. is 11:15.
And?
And I've been here about an hour. I was in surgery for about, 40 minutes. And they closed, the doctor, professor even, closed the PFO, the hole in the heart, with a stitch via a minimally invasive catheter procedure. It was all very interesting. I was very nervous, my first operation, but it was easy. I was awake the whole time, I wasn't sedated. There was local anaesthetic where they made the incision, but otherwise I was there, I was chatting for part of it with the doctor, with the nurses. A few funny sensations, in the chest, in the hip. And if you think about it, you can kind of feel that there are some catheters in your body moving, but nothing terrible, just unusual sensations here and there sometimes. A bit boring, really. No, it was nice, all very well done, the team was amazing, and now I have to lie flat for 4 hours, just to make sure that the incision, where they made the incision, so it's here at the groin, doesn't bleed. They sewed it up or stapled it or whatever, I haven't looked. And I think they sewed it, so they take the stitches out tomorrow, but I have to lie flat for 4 hours. Just to make sure it all, because they puncture a vein to get in there, just to make sure it all stays shut. I drank my first glass of water about half an hour after the procedure. I have this wonderful bedpan, shirt bedpan, not used yet, so you can show it. In all, I remember reading lots of experiences about, the dentist being worse than this. That's absolutely my experience. We'll tell you more about it when I look better, but I'm fine. It was very good.
Update time?
Yeah, so they brought me in at 10:30 to here after the operation, and now it's 6 p.m. I lay flat for a long time. I was horizontal, or more or less horizontal, I think until about 3:30, 10:30 till 3:30, that's how much, like 5 hours. I think they just forgot about me, actually, but I called them. I was like, look, it's probably time to get up, right? And I took some steps around, they put me on my feet slowly, I walked around, I went to the bathroom, and now I just had dinner. Dinner was Spartan from the hospital, you'll see the pictures, but Justinia thankfully probably broke all the rules and brought me falafel sandwich, falafel durum. So I'm good, feel good.
You're in a different room?
I'm in a different room. They moved me. Clearly the 2-person room was temporary, and they asked me whether I was a private patient and moved me to this room. I guess because I paid for my procedure, I earned a private room, paid for a private room. I don't know, I don't remember. And yeah, I feel good. I feel completely myself again. The incision, I won't show you, we'll find a way to do it afterwards. There's a lot of nakedness in hospital, right? They keep on coming in and lifting up and looking, and of course they have to pull my gown aside a bit and they asked me before, but like at the beginning, every 45 minutes they were coming in, looking under my skirt, essentially, at everything. It's a bit unusual, but
we are in Germany though.
Yeah, exactly, that's true. We'll do some photos when we can see it a bit more, some modest photos. It's fine, hasn't bled or anything, I don't think. It's stitched together, but it's getting sore. Not like sore hot or anything like that, but like when you can feel there's going to be a big bruise and it feels a bit heavy, it's like that. And when I got up, I could feel when I stood up, it was a bit painful, that bending, that folding in the hips. Once I was up, it was okay, but they told me not to stay on my feet for too long, so I sat back down. And that's it. What else do you want to know about?
You're connected to IV?
Yeah, I'm connected to an IV, just filling me up with some more essential fluids. They gave me some antibiotics right after the operation. That was also another IV. This is like the second or third IV of NaCl,
sodium something that they've given me. I forgot what it was, I read it, but it's something to help you recover after great exertion or whatever. And yeah, I'm set up. I can.
All the people who have been to hospitals before are gonna laugh.
It's my first time in a hospital.
It's
I
such
told
an
them.
obvious thing to know.
I keep on telling them I don't know anything, so sorry. The bed goes up and down. I can go down. Look at this, very space age. And there are various other settings, which are all very advanced. I'm a bit scared to use them, so I'm just sticking with this one for now. Let's hope I don't get trapped in the bed tonight. I'm spending the night here. They gave me a prescription for some medications afterwards, and they're going to examine me at, I think, 11 tomorrow. And if everything's good, they will check me out, and I can go back to the hotel for one more night before we head home. This is the second time Justinia's been here today. Shout out to Justinia. Even though she's pregnant, I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that, but you can always cut it. She's still come to visit, and she's breaking the rules right now because visiting time is
Until 6.
Yeah, it's now 6:05. So since we're in a Catholic hospital, you can expect the nuns to arrive soon, and then there's going to be sticks, wooden sticks.
Lovely.
That's it. All is good otherwise. So far, no discomfort in the chest or anything, which I hope it continues that way. I guess that's the advantage of the stitch over the device. Although not everybody has discomfort, so we'll see. I'll keep on taking it easy. I'm probably not going to sleep amazingly, but I'll try. And yeah, very happy at the moment.
What's going on?
Just doing our last tests before they hopefully check me out. Blood pressure's high still, but I don't know. We'll see.
Did they say why it could be that?
No.
The case? No.
They're just taking the readings at the moment. I haven't yet talked to a doctor.
Okay.
We'll see. Everything else I think is okay.
How's your wound?
It's fine. It's fine. It's hardly there. And it's less sore today than yesterday. But I think now it looks like they're going to do maybe... They just did an EKG. This looks like an echo where they look at the heart.
Okay.
Enjoy.
You're a free man?
Shall we do a photo before and after? What do you think? So good morning. We're now day 9 post-procedure. I had it done on the 21st and today is the 30th of November. And I'm out for a walk. It's 9 AM and I'm walking, I don't know how far, in theory to Limoux and back, which is 7 kilometers, brisk walk, but I don't think I have time to do the whole thing, so it might end up a bit shorter, maybe 5 or something like that. But that's not what this is about. Well, sort of. How am I feeling? I feel great. The wound, the incisions, there are a few of them it looks like, have healed really, really well. I stopped putting the bandage on after about day 5, something like that. Although I didn't really need it for the first days, I don't think. It's all healing up really well, starting to itch, which means the skin is forming. And yeah, no real problems with that. There was a decent bruise, of course. But already from day 2, I was walking around more or less normally. The first day after the procedure was sore and I was slow and it was a bit tricky to stand up and sit down, but by day 2 it was good. I was walking enough. And by now you can see I'm not back to sport, but I am walking. I've been trying to do a walk or a brisk walk of maybe 20 to 40 minutes each day, just to keep some level of fitness whilst I recover. Because of course they say You know, many doctors, well, some doctors will say that you can return to regular activity within 2 weeks. Some doctors will say within 1 week. Some doctors will say give it a month or two. Difficult to know. It's a very minimalist procedure I had, but nevertheless I do quite a lot of hard sport, quite a lot of unusual things, and I've decided to not stress the heart too much, not to risk it, allow the heart to adapt, and to take it easy basically, at least for the first couple of months. It helps me that Christmas and New Year are in those first couple of months, so you know that fits pretty well. Otherwise, what did I experience? So the medical symptoms, consequences after the procedure, what did I have? Not that much really, aside from, you know, the bruising, the stiffness. To do with the heart, nothing at all, except high blood pressure. They spotted that in the hospital, but I have this white coat syndrome where you're afraid of doctors, and my blood pressure is always high in medical settings, so I think we kind of partially wrote it off to that. But we have a blood pressure monitor at home, so I continued monitoring, and it was definitely elevated for the first maybe 4 or 5 days, maybe a bit more after the procedure. But the main thing is I've been measuring it like 3 times a day, and the numbers have been consistently going down day after day, and we're now 9 days after procedure, and I'm back to almost normal values, almost 120/80. So today I was getting like, I don't know, 122/82 or 125/85, something like that, which is good.
Is this the first time you had a green light?
No, I had a bunch of green lights earlier today as well. Not when I woke up, but in the early afternoon. Yes.
So that's the first day, right?
First day when I've had
surgery.
Green lights, yeah.
Nice.
Well, I've had the odd green light, like 1 or 2. But it's not much considering we're almost 3 weeks out. This is the first day when I've gotten a lot of green lights. Because I usually, it's a bit much, but because I know I have a problem with getting stressed with this thing, I usually take a few measurements each time I do it, because I realise that the first measurement is always quite a bit higher than the second and much higher than the third. So it takes a bit of time, but in order to get some hopefully more accurate measurements, I usually do 3, and I got 3 good ones earlier. No, I'm getting low blood. No, I'm only joking. It's fine. All done.
3 green ones in a row? 6 actually.
6 in a row. 6 green ones in a row.
Amazing.
I just measured his blood pressure through his tail.
I noticed my ring, the Aura ring, which monitors sleep, tells me that my heart rate has been a bit elevated at night. Not much, but sort of average, instead of 50 or 51, more like 55 or 57, and it was climbing for a few nights. Last night it seemed to have dropped a bit. So yeah, I'm guessing all of this is probably the heart adapting either to the new mechanics, because we closed a hole through which blood was passing before, or just to the irritation of having, you know, equipment up there in the heart, the catheters and all of that sort of thing. In any case, we'll see. It seems to be getting better, and hopefully over the next few months it will do what it's supposed to. The tissue will knit together. You know, the tissue that was folded together to close this heart will knit, to close this hole, sorry, will knit together, and we'll be good. The real test is what we have to do is in 4 weeks and 6 months, we have to do a bubble test. The test of whether it's worked or not. So technically the whole procedure was a success. They folded over the tissue, they put the suture through, pulled it tight, and hopefully it's all sealed up. But as with a device, the same as suture and a device, they both have this test that you need to do afterwards to see to what extent do you have a good seal.
because what we want to prevent is the blood going from the right chamber of the heart to the left, which it shouldn't do. And it takes time. If you put a device in there to close the tunnel, your tissue grows over it, gradually the barrier increases in that way. The same with the stitch. The tissue will form around the little knot that's left and hopefully close up better. So I thought it's worth saying a few words about mental state after the whole thing. And obviously this is a burden that was on me for some years, this risk of having an open PFO. I felt really relieved after the operation when it was closed, but not completely relieved. Probably the same as with many operations. You don't know fully to what extent it's been or it will be successful. The surgeon said to me it's technically was a success. Closed the tunnel, everything went well, but with this one you really have to wait and see how well the tunnel is closed in 4 weeks, 6 months, 12 months. For some people it even takes longer, because whether it's a device or a stitch, the tissue grows over the top of it. So you've either folded a tunnel closed like this, or you've put an umbrella in. So I think the key thing is I didn't expect to feel 100% cured for sure. I don't know, but it's definitely a big burden that's been taken off my shoulders. And yeah, I'm trying to be happy about it, to rejoice as much as I can, but at the same time to recognize it'll take some months or maybe longer to see fully how successful it is. But in any case, at least the fear of the procedure is diminished greatly. So in the worst case scenario, if I had to redo it, I would be much calmer, because it's really, it isn't anything to worry about.